Is it live yet? Are we live? Are we live? Okay, now I see the sign that we're live. Woot woot! After much ado about nothing, here we are back on the screen, back streaming together again, and it feels so good. This is MoJoe from MoJoe.studio with my dear friends and mighty soul sibs, Kristen Brown and D. Grant Smith, and I'm so happy to be with you. Yay! So, Kristen, let everybody know where you are, where you're streaming from today, and tell us a little bit about you for those who have never met you before.
I am streaming from North Phoenix, Arizona, and saying a little bit about myself, boundaries is probably one of my favorite topics of all time. Boundaries, self-worth, recovery, these type of things, because they work hand in hand. And I'm really super pumped for this conversation today because boundaries say, I matter. Joseph froze.
Boundaries say I matter. And D. Grant Smith, you are in a different location. I froze now? Okay.
You're back.
Of course. Hold please for technical difficulties. Okay, I'm back for the moment until it glitches again. But D. Grant Smith, I see that smile on your face, and I see that you're surrounded by orange, which is one of my all-time favorite colors. In fact, if I were a color, I would be orange. So welcome to the show, and tell us where are you streaming from, and a little bit about yourself for those who have never met you.
So about 3 years ago, I used to work in this old building in Abilene, the 1018 building. And it had this little bitty office. I think it was like 80 square feet. It was basically a closet that they converted into an office. And I was there for probably 2 or 3 years. Anyhow, I came to hang out with my buddy Topher today. And this whole downstairs used to be, I think it used to be an office of this like consulting marketing firm. And they repainted like all the desktops. I'm on this massive desktop. Everything is pink except for the walls, which are orange, which I think is why the orange like really glows a little bit more. But this is a very like, looks like a starburst room. There's a part of me now that wants to eat some starburst. So that's where I'm hanging out because I'm doing a bunch of stuff in Abilene today. So your other question.
Just introduce yourself to those who have never met you, D. Grant.
Oh, well, if you've never met me before, my name is D, or you can call me D. Grant, or you can call me David, or you can call me Dave, or you can call me whatever you want to. I'm really not attached to names, but what I do is I tell stories, and I help people create awesome stories through their lives, and I help businesses create awesome stories in the ways that you communicate with other people. Because a lot of times we have a real hard time talking about ourselves. We don't exactly know how to do that or what to say. And I found that if I illustrate what it is that I do and who I am through a story, then it makes people go, whoa, I'm interested in that. So I call myself the Wizard of Story. I call myself the Wizard of Storytelling. You've probably seen a picture of me that looks like Doctor Strange because I did superimpose my face on his body and I'm doing some magical stuff. And I'm also the growth farmer of personal development through spirituality and storytelling. And I've got a link in, you guys can see, right there, growthfarming.com. So I help people grow more love in their hearts and in their minds and in their bodies and their spirits to produce that with their lives and their relationships.
And already, for those of you who are just tuning in for the very first time, you can see why I love these two people, because my life grows and it gets enhanced in all the right ways every time I get to hang out with them, whether that's online or back channel. And interestingly enough, before D. Grant was able to find a room where there was a good connection, Kristen and I were talking about storytelling in particular. And it was Jim Quick who wrote the book Limitless. And I recommended that to D. Grant, a year and a half ago. One of my all-time favorite books, one that I've read in the last several years. But he talks a ton about storytelling and how in the history of mankind, long before there was written word and certainly before the internet, the way any information was transferred from one generation to the next, especially the most important information, was through storytelling. Sit around the campfire, they sit around whatever, as a tribe, as a clan, and the wise men and the children and whatever, they would tell the stories. And of course, the stories would get more and more elaborate from one generation to next. But it wasn't about the particulars. It wasn't about the specifics. It was about the truths that were being conveyed through those messages. But all that to say, Jim illustrates in a very powerful way that the way our minds work is we remember stories. Why? Because we imagine them. So we get immersed in the story. We're experiencing it through our imagination. It even, I say, allows time travel because you can go backwards in time, you can go forwards in time. But all that to say, a person won't remember bullet points. They won't remember principles generally. They won't even remember good catchphrases, which I'm fond of, as you know. But what they will remember is stories because they put themselves into the story with their imagination. And so I think that's super important. And we're going to apply that. We're also going to apply Jim Quick's book, Limitless. He structures it in 3 parts intentionally and in order. And this is built right into the title of our talk today: mindset, motivation, and methods. And long book short, what I would say is oftentimes we want to jump right to methods. How do I, in fact, you see this on the internet everywhere, how to change your life in 4 simple steps, how to get rid of this, how to get that. And it's all methods. And it's not that the methods don't work, but they're not sustainable if your mindset and your motivation are not in place. Because the methods eventually you'll just peter out, and you either won't believe they work, which is your mindset, because you don't believe you can do it, or you won't have a compelling why. And so when things get hard and it wasn't fun anymore, then you quit. And that's motivation. So all those things are required. And I'll just use that as a segue then into our talk today, which I'm thrilled to talk about as well, because this has been a lifelong learning lesson for MoJoe McCarthy. And even this week, I've had to practice. I've had to put myself into boundary lessons that aren't comfortable for me. They're not natural. I'd much rather not even do it. But when I do, the rewards are fantastic, right? As I've told you guys back channel. So let's set this up though first. Let's talk about what are boundaries, because I know there's a lot of stuff on the internet about what boundaries are and what they aren't. And I just want to make sure, and I don't want to define it for the whole world, but for the 3 of us in this conversation, let's make sure we're all on the same page as what do we mean when we talk about boundaries. And a little side note real quick is that many years ago, I got to go on a golf outing with Henry Cloud. Henry Cloud's the co-author of the original Boundaries book, Henry Cloud and John Townsend. So I spent 18 holes, and he was an awesome golfer, and I sucked. So I spent 18 holes chasing my ball, but I did get to ride in the cart with Henry Cloud, the author of Boundaries. And all that to say, if you ever get a chance to read a book about boundaries, I highly recommend it. He wrote a whole series, he and John Townsend. His name is Henry Cloud again, and I highly recommend the Boundaries book because it really does help understand what we're talking about. Let's start with you, Kristen. When you think of boundaries, how do you define that? What does that mean to you?
I keep things very simple, as you guys know. I make it very palatable, and I would say, clear and simply, it is just a clear limit with other people's treatment of you. It's as simple as it gets. It's a clear limit. Do you want just the definition, or do you want me to say more? Should we go to D?
Well, let's establish the definition so that we're all talking about the same thing, and then we'll move on to elaborate. So go ahead, D. Grant. When you think of boundaries, if someone said to you, how do you define boundaries? What does that mean to you, brother?
I think that Kristen's definition is pretty sufficient. I think about things in terms of like what's out of bounds, what's the lines that can't be crossed, what can you, kind of like a game, where can you step on the line and it's not necessarily what you want, you'll make some grace period for it, but if it goes too far, then it's like, no, that's illegal, we don't do that here, that's against the rules. And so that's kind of the way that I see boundaries. And I think it's also like we can have, at least, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Kristen talk about this because I consider her to be the boundary queen. But for me, and there's some things in my understanding of boundaries that I'm relearning right now, to be perfectly honest, because there's boundaries we have with the general public and general everybody, and then there's boundaries that we have with certain levels of our friends, and there's boundaries we have with people that we're really close to, and typically with people that we're really close to, we'll allow them to stretch those boundaries, or at least I have, further than we will just some random passerby on the street. But I'm learning how to be more aware of when somebody has said something to me that really hits, and not take it personally, because I do try to practice the 4 agreements. But if it hits hard, like, how do I express that, this is something that's not cool? So this is something, like you said, Joe, I'm still growing in this stuff too.
Cool. Yeah. So for me, the word that makes perfect sense, at least in this moment, is guardrails. And the reason guardrails is so important to me is because it dawned on me just yesterday as we were preparing for this talk that when guardrails are built on a highway, and the highway I always think of is this Zimmerman Trail in Billings, Montana, where I grew up. There's a 500-foot cliff on one side of the town and a windy trail that goes from the top of the cliff down to the valley where the city is. It's only a 2-lane road. One side's the cliff, the other side is a drop off. And there's a guardrail, not very high, doesn't look very strong. But I just remember as a kid going up and down this hill, and the guardrail isn't for the person who built it, right? The workers that put the guardrail in, they weren't thinking, hey, it's for me. It's for the people that are navigating this road to keep them from harming themselves or harming others. And it finally, that idea flipped in my favor. I started thinking, boundaries I always thought was for me, and it is, right? Because I'm building them, but it's also for me, but it's also to protect others as well. So as a person who always wants to please and always wants to give and always wants to love, boundaries were hard for me because I thought, well, people aren't going to like that. Well, it turns out boundaries or guardrails are the best thing for them. And once I can wrap my mind around that the guardrails aren't just for the one who builds it, but for the people who are navigating so that they can navigate safely, well, then I can really lean into boundaries and see how important and that they are. And the other little caveat is I've heard many people say that healthy fences create healthy relationships or healthy neighbors. And I just want to throw in here that kind of fence is not a wall, right? Because walls between neighbors create division and there's no relationship. So I think of the fences that are like the slats, like the old wooden slats in the Western days. Of course, I grew up in Montana. Why would I not think of this? But the wooden slats with lots of holes in between, so you can go up to the fence and you can talk with your neighbor and you can have a conversation. You can laugh and create relationship. But there's still a clear boundary as to what's mine and what's yours. So that's kind of the thoughts that come to mind for me. And I think in pictures, and hopefully that'll help others as well. Kristen, jump in.
Oh, gosh. I was just, when you were saying that boundaries are for both people, that is something that I actually referred to it. I grabbed my new book, The Recovering People Pleaser. I have a whole chapter on boundaries in here. And I'm going to put this real close to the screen. Hopefully you can read it. It says, boundaries serve both people. That's what it says here, because the shocking thing that I noticed when I started to set boundaries is that it was the best thing that I could do for the other person as well. And I'm thinking of a story in particular where my daughter would come home from whatever outing she'd had, and I'd go to bed, and she'd come home and she'd come in my room and she'd want to talk to me. And she just, going off about the drama in her teenage life and this and this and da da da. She went on and on. And I would listen because I'm thinking something's really up and I need to be available for her. So I would listen. I'd keep showing up night after night. It turned out it was the kind of the same narrative, the same story, the same stuff. And here I am being woken up in the middle of the night. And then I have to try to fall back asleep and I have to get up early and go to work. And this was during my College of Kristen. So this was in that deep internal movement in my life where I was really shifting, morphing, and realizing my worth for the first time. And I remember I said to her that I think, I don't know, it was before she went out that night or to work or whatever, or it was when she woke me up. But I remember saying to her, no, like, we're not doing this tonight. This needs to keep until the morning. I will be happy to have this conversation with you in the morning. Now, of course, she was mad. She's a teenager and she's moody. And she was like, And the next morning I went to her some point in the day whenever we crossed paths, because she worked and went to school too. And I said, so do you need, to talk about something from last night? She goes, oh no, I figured it out. And I was like, okay. So me saying no actually gave her the opportunity to take some time and to go within and to work it out. And I feel like a lot of times we're not setting, like, that's really about saying no. And by the way, I put a free guide that I just made last week and I absolutely love it. I put the link over here. Yes, MoJoe's throwing it up there. But I made a free guide about saying no, because when we say no to people, it is always serving to both people involved. it can't not be, because it is rooted in love. And anything that is rooted in the highest essence and energy of love, which is the most powerful force on the universe, then it is always 100% correct for all people involved, because it is rooted in love, even when it's love of self. And this is what can really jack people up, because people start to believe they're being selfish by setting a boundary. Oh, I was selfish for not wanting to be woken up in the middle of the night. No. So by me doing that, rooted on care of me, loving myself and giving myself that care, when I did that, I noticed that she was able to do for herself what she was relying on me to do. Now, that's not 100% the case. Sometimes we just need to set boundaries with people that are treating us poorly, that are raising their voices to us or calling us names or making jokes at our expense or whatever it might be. And we need to speak up and to set a boundary. However, this is where it gets serving for them, because what we're doing is we're shining a light on a shadow aspect of their personality that they may not know or have been aware of. So
Yep.
when you come to someone and you say, hey, that's not cool, XYZ, whatever it is you're doing, that person's like, if they're self-aware and they're not have narcissistic tendencies or gaslighting, they're going to say, I can see what you're saying. But now they've become aware of themselves that was unconscious. And
Right.
so our boundary, when I say it serves both people, it actually gives we both grow. We're giving a person an opportunity to grow. Now, that's not the reason why we're doing it. We're not doing it to try to control other people or anything else. What we're doing is setting that boundary and saying, this is my line. You get to show up for this line or not. And I'm going to remove myself, or there'll be some type of consequence if you continue with this infraction that you're doing. Yet, on the other side of that, for the people that are willing to show up to the mission, they get alerted to something inside themselves, and then they get to grow too.
Whew, so good. Before I jump to D Grant, so I just got to reflect on this for a second. This is so important for me to understand this and to begin to practice it. But so first, I'm going to paint the picture and then talk about my own life. In Montana, cattle outnumber people 6-1. I mean,
Wow.
I was outnumbered by cows, right, when I grew up. And I saw lots of cows. My grandparents had cows, and we had fences, and I actually helped repair broken fences many times to make sure the cattle did not get out of the land. Why? Because if they did, they're going to get lost, they're going to get hurt, they're going to get out of the highway, probably going to get killed. So by repairing the fences, as difficult as that was, and wasn't fun, especially out in the middle of the heat, Montana, and dusty, and driving posts into the hard rock ground is not fun at all, but it served a really good purpose, because the cattle actually was the income of my dad and his wife, my stepmom. And if they lost one cow, or if they lost a lot of cows, they lost their income, and they lost meat if they were going to eat it, etc. So it was, as you said, it served both people. It served the cow, kept the cow from getting hurt or getting lost. It served the person who put the fence up, because that was their income, their property, it was their food for that matter. So that's just an illustration where that works both ways. And I was driving down the road in Wyoming from Billings, Montana to Buffalo, Wyoming, where my dad lives. And there was off in the distance, it looked like something right in the middle of the highway. I couldn't tell what it was from a long ways away. The closer we got, my wife and I started slowing down. What is that? Two cows walking right in front of each other, right down the stripe of the highway. And we're looking around like, what's going on? Free range cattle, they don't know what they're doing. So they're walking in harm's way. So exactly what Kristen was saying, by setting the boundaries, putting the fences in the right places, calling it healthy boundaries is really important. Boundaries can be healthy or unhealthy, and we'll get to that later. But healthy boundaries is good for both parties. And then a really life example from my own life, just within the last week or so, I was volunteering at an event. I was doing my best to help to make sure everything was working out. And throughout the day, the person that was in charge would just bark things at me like I was a dog, and in front of other people. And I was hurt. I was embarrassed. I was like, I'm doing my best to serve, and I don't need any attention here. I want this event to be successful. But it seems like no matter what I do, I'm not getting called out for it in front of other people. And it was humiliating. It was embarrassing. It was degrading. But I wasn't going to respond, in the moment in front of all these grown men and say, hey, don't do that. And that sucks. And why do you talk to me? And I certainly wasn't going to yell back at the person in charge. But what I had to do, which is so against everything that I've ever done in my life, I left the event and I went to my computer before I even went home. And I put down on paper as best I could all the details of the things that happened and how it made me feel. And I hesitated for the longest time. Should I press send? Like I reworded it. I tried to make sure I wasn't accusatory, that I wasn't lambasting, that I wasn't being a nasty guy, but I was telling the truth of here's what you did and here's how it made me feel. And I don't want that to happen again because I got to work with this guy, right? And so against everything in me, I press send, and within seconds I get a text back that says, "Hey, let's talk about that tomorrow." Like, oh crap, now what? Right? that could go any way, could go any direction.
Right.
And I get in the conversation with this guy one on one, and he goes through the email point by point and explains where he was coming from, what was in his mind, the reason that he behaved the way he behaved, and it dawned on me in that moment that I was seeing everything from my perspective. And yes, the treatment was uncalled for and it was unfair, and he apologized. And but he also explained why he did what he did. People behave for a reason. We just often don't know what the reason is. And it may be healthy, it may be unhealthy, it may be toxic, it may be helpful, but we don't know unless we ask. That's why questions are the answer. And so I put it out there. Hey, what were you thinking? And then he told me what he was thinking. And he said, what were you thinking? Because here's what I interpreted. I got to explain myself. By the end of the conversation, we're both in tears. I'm choking up right now. We're both in tears. We're hugging each other saying, hey, I'm sorry. And then 50 pounds of what ifs and, oh God, I shouldn't do this, just gone. And things moving. It's like the lubrication of a relationship. It's like you pour in the oil and it was awesome. And I don't do that. I don't rarely do that, but I want to be that kind of person because I do believe now more than ever that the E in love, LOVE, the E cannot stand for enable. It can stand for empower, empathize, equip, right? But it can't stand for enable. And that's what lack of boundaries does, is it enables the other person to treat me in a way that I don't want to be treated, which just only ruins the relationship, right? So, okay. That was a big one. So I'll pass it off to D. Grant. Jump in, D.
Well, I think both of you guys just shared amazing brilliance and like the hard stuff that really matters from your own life experience. I think for me, part of this is a learning curve. I mean, boundaries were not something that I'd ever even heard of until I was in my 30s, and I'm 41. So do the math on that. That's several decades of maybe hearing the term, but it just totally flying over my head. And but going back to the thing about, for me, I think the hardest place to have boundaries is in my closest relationships with people, because there's this like instinctive trust that like surely they know that when they say these things, this is a hurtful thing to say. And people don't know. Even the people that are closest with us don't know. And then there's another side of this thing, and this is, I guess, where I'm coming into a greater awareness myself. When we, as young children, A, were not taught this stuff, and B, our voice was not given any sort of power or acknowledgement, then we carry this belief that it doesn't matter what I say. And I'll be super honest, like that's something that this week in particular just like has hit me over and over and over again. It doesn't matter what I say. I can ask for this. I can say, please don't do this. I can say, hey, want to respond to something that I've asked you? And it doesn't matter what I say. And I recognize that that's a story I've been telling myself. And so, of course, that's going to be my experience. But if I'm looking at the situation and thinking that it's just the person, without recognizing that it's the story that's inside of me that's actually replicating this over and over again, then really what that is that boundary might be applicable to other people, but it's really about my relationship with myself. And so there's some things that I've become more aware of that have repeated in the same type of relationship with different people. So it's not just the one person, it's that relationship dynamic. And so I have to take responsibility for, because that's me. That's a reflection of something. They're just reflecting something back in me. And part of the responsibility thing and doing this self-evaluation, I'm not going to get into the specifics of it, but I sent both of these beautiful people a question yesterday because I'm doing some reflection on myself, and I want to see things from an outsider's perspective that I can't see about myself, because I recognize that there are things about the way that I operate that are not exactly healthy, and we don't know what we don't know. And sometimes our closest friends can see things about us, but maybe don't necessarily feel like they have the permission to be able to be honest. Every time I talk to Kristen, she'll always say, "Can I be honest with you, D?" And she's got an open-ended invitation to do that, and I appreciate the question. But like, part of boundaries and part of our ability to be able to draw healthy boundaries is also our ability to be aware of some of our own patterns that we're not aware of. And sometimes it is about like looking at um, different different things that have happened with different people in similar relationship dynamics, whether that's a romantic dating marriage sort of thing, or that's having a really really close buddy, or that's a dynamic that you've had the same sort of dynamic with different bosses working different jobs. There's something that's going on there, and that's an internal. Sometimes it's not even like a mental thing. Sometimes it's some sort of even like energetic emotional thing that like just needs to be addressed. And the other thing I wanted to say is like, I'm very big on Ho'oponopono, and I'm very big on forgiveness. But one thing that I'm recognizing within myself, because there are some things that have been said to me recently that and I'm still doing my best not to take it personally, but I have to allow myself to like acknowledge that that hurt. That was painful. And so instead of immediately trying to jump over into, well, you know what, I don't want to be angry, I don't want to be upset, I want to just go ahead and forgive them. Like, it's actually loving for me, and it's a good boundary for me to like, I'm gonna let myself feel this so I can understand what it is and then let it go.
Whew, so good. Yeah, I can feel that because it's part of my own journey as well. And so I would like to go back to the mindset motivation methods, and we've kind of bounced around a bit, and that's fine. I love how the conversation flows very organically. But to help people understand why this framework is so important, let's talk a little bit specifically about mindset. To me, is the belief system, right? Mindset has lots of definitions and it's thrown around a lot in conversations. But what I think Jim Quick was getting at in his book Limitless was that mindset is our belief system about ourselves. If we don't believe that that's good for us, if we don't believe that boundaries are important, if we don't believe that we can draw healthy boundaries or that we can maintain them, like Henry Ford said, whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. Because, as Howard Falco taught us all, our ego is designed to prove our belief systems are correct, even if they're askew. So I might believe that, boundaries are selfish. If I believe that, and I have for a lot of my life, I will act accordingly because my ego wants to prove me right. So it actually requires a mind shift, change my mindset. And I was even thinking about the word mindset. That's very static, right? And our minds are dynamic. They're flowing. They're in motion all the time. So it's almost a mind shift, really, for me to one, be aware what is my mindset. And I love what D. Grant said, that sometimes I can't see my own blind spots, right? That's why they're called blind spots. And Howard also pointed out to us once that our eyes in our head physically face outwards. We see the external world, but they're not faced inwards, so we can't always see what's inside of us. I mean, meditation very helps a ton. It reveals lots of things, but sometimes the feedback we get from others, especially those who love us, that will speak the truth in love. This is a Bible phrase. You guys know that I love the Bible phrases, but this is misused a lot. Speak the truth in love. You have to have both parts or it falls apart. If you speak the truth with no love, it's like a hammer. If you speak with love but you don't speak the truth, it's enabling, right? That's not the that you want in your love. But if you speak the truth in love, that even when it stings, it's helpful, right? And there's this other scripture that goes right along here that says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. How can that be? Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Well, if Kristen says, can I be honest with you? And you say yes, then she's got permission to say, well, here's what I see, and you can take it for what it's worth, as she likes to say, take the best and leave the rest. But if it fits, then usually, for me anyway, it stings. Like, I didn't see it or I didn't want to admit that issue was in my life. But that sting draws my attention to it. And the pain, right, the suffering, even though it's minimal, it's minor, it's in my head, it draws my attention, my energy to it so that I can actually heal it. So I can, if I'm not aware of it, I can't fix it because I don't know it's there. So the awareness can sting, but faithful are the wounds of a friend. If the truth is spoken in love, well, then there's a chance for correction, for course correction. And as I said, we're dynamic beings. We're moving and changing all the time. If we don't course correct, who knows where we're going to end up? I've even heard that in a transcontinental airplane that has autopilot, let's say a big commercial airline. So it's constantly evaluating all the different dynamics in the atmosphere that are pushing against the plane, right? And in any given transcontinental flight from New York to LA or back, the plane is actually technically off course 60 to 70% of the time. And all the time, the autopilot is evaluating where are we going, where we're headed, and then it's adjusting the little ailerons and the flaps and the wheels and the pressure and whatever. So it keeps getting us back on course. And then we go off and back on course. You can't control what you can't control. That's why I love the serenity prayer. God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the externals, but to change the things I can, the internals, and the wisdom to know the difference. All that to say, I love this autopilot thing because you still leave LAX and you end up in New York, even though you're off course 60 to 70% of the time. Why? Because you course correct. You take an evaluation. All right, what should I keep doing? What should I stop doing? What should I start doing? That's the 3 questions that I have to ask all the time. And sometimes I can't answer them myself, right? I need the loving input of friends. And that way I can course correct so I don't end up in Guadalajara or China or Alaska or in the middle of the ocean. Okay. All right, Kristen, I'm going to toss it over to you now.
Wow, that was awesome. So I have so many things to say. I don't even know where to start. So what I started out the conversation with is that boundaries say I matter. Okay. But you brought up a really good point talking about when things sting. There's a difference between disrespectful and abusive behavior and us taking something personally or being too sensitive. So I had a girlfriend who was constantly complaining about her husband, complaining. He says these things to me and this and that. And so being who I am, I ask a lot of questions because I just don't take words for it anymore. And I ask a lot of questions, and she started to explain things that he was saying, and he was not being disrespectful or abusive. But she thought she had to have all these boundaries with him. And I said, no, he's asking you to do things, but it's processing through your filter of unworthiness and shame. So it is being skewed when it comes through to you. So now she's thinking it's disrespectful and abuse when really she had the thing. So before I continue what I'm saying, I want to be clear that to me, boundaries are setting lines and limits with people who are disrespecting, dishonoring, or abusing you. Either mind, body, and spirit. So that's what it is. This is when we have to step up and say no. So,
hold that thought just for a second.
Yeah.
So the picture that just popped in my mind, the way you described that, is in the movie Wakanda Forever and Black Panther. They live in this country that's invisible to the outside world because of the shield that covers the whole city, right? But they can pass through the shield, no problem. This invisible force field that nobody else can see it. And they can let in their allies, their friends, through the shield. But it repels the enemies, the people that threaten them. And just came to life to me, right? That healthy boundaries isn't just a fence, it's a force field that allows the people who love you, who are your allies, who are your family, your friends, who care about you, to pass in and out of that membrane, that force field freely. But those who are a threat to your well-being, it is a force field that they cannot penetrate, right? So that's why I just got that picture I had to share.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Look at the power of storytelling. There you go, Joe.
Right, there we go. Power of storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was on the Wisdom app one time, I was talking to this gentleman. I won't say who he is. I actually wrote this story in my book, and he kept saying, He's a dating coach. He kept saying, you just need to set a boundary, just need to set a boundary, just need to set a boundary. And what I kept saying to him was, I don't think you understand that it's not that easy for people, that sometimes people are not yet capable. He goes, well, the more you do it, yeah, it was for me too. He said, the more you do it, it's like tying a shoe, you get better at it. And I said, but I don't think you're understanding. Some people don't even want to try to tie the shoe. So they can't get better at it. So I have a chapter in my book that's called What Comes First? Self-love or boundaries. And what that, do I have to have the self-love first to be able to set the boundary? Or do I need to set the boundary and then I get to love myself? I'm loving myself. Because boundaries are one of what I call the 5 self-love tenets. They are the tenet that is respect and protect self. Now, it doesn't mean armor. Armor means we put up this huge wall around our heart and nothing comes in and nothing goes out. And I explain a boundary as a mesh that's around us where we're keeping out things that are harmful. I actually tell this story. It's like a garden where a bunch of critters are coming in and eating the garden. If you put a block wall around all sides of that garden, the garden's going to die, right? But it'll keep the critters out, but it keeps out the sunlight, it keeps out the rain, it keeps out everything else. But you want to have this protective field around you, like you were saying, like a mesh around the garden. So you keep out the critters, but yet the sunlight and the rain and everything can come in to nourish the garden. So we don't want to guard ourselves. We don't want to armor ourselves. This is about really mindful protection. So with that being said, what comes first, self-love or boundaries? The answer is both. It's whatever works for you. If you're able to set a boundary and hold that boundary, awesome. But if you're not yet, then I highly encourage people to work on their self-worth, work on loving themselves, and I mean a reset. I'm not talking about taking a bath. I'm talking about forgiveness of self, compassion and acceptance of self. The 5 self-love tenets are by and far the miracle cure to healing unworthiness. And once we start to get just a little bit of that foundation under us, which people don't even know what that feels like because they have not felt it yet, okay, then the natural byproduct is going to be healthy boundaries because we love ourselves. So whether or not you can or can't yet, don't worry about it. Start working on that love of self, and then you will be able to effectively set healthy boundaries. I'm going to pause there because I don't want to take up a lot of time. But I do have one more thing at the end that I want to talk about, or when the next one is.
So let me just point out what Kristen just said, that whether you think you can or you think you can't, make your adjustments. But that does go back to mindset as well, that if you think you can't, and you are aware of that, that's the beginning of the awareness that you can change. So the danger is thinking that I can't, that I never will be able to. And I just want to point out that thinking, which is a mindset, it's a belief system. It's actually a limiting belief system. And I'm starting to think that all belief systems are limiting belief systems, but I don't want to digress there. But all that to say, you start with the awareness, of course, of your mindset. If your mindset says that I can't, then as Henry Ford said so famously, then you, if you believe you can't, then you can't. If you believe you can, then you can. And that's not an easy shift, as you pointed out. But here's what I wanted to throw in right here before I hear from D. Grant, is that I believe more and more all the time that success is a sustained series of small, simple steps towards your desired destination. I'll say that again. Success is a sustained series of small, simple steps in your desired direction. All of those words are super important to me in that equation or in that definition, because oftentimes we think we have to go a quantum leap where I have 0 boundaries and that I have to go to healthy boundaries all in one step. And life doesn't work that way. Growth doesn't work that way. D. Grant is the growth farmer. He talks this metaphor all the time, which I love. You plant the seeds, you nurture it, you prune it. It takes time. And I think that's why it's profoundly illuminating that the definition of love in the Bible starts with patience. Love is patient. That's the very first descriptor, right? And we all live in an instant gratification society where everything is microwavable and it's on demand. And we think that personal growth is instant, or we expect that it will be. And when it isn't, which it isn't even designed to be that way, right? Then we give up or we say, oh, I was right, I can't do this. You don't know because you haven't done the sustained series of small, simple steps in the desired direction. And it may take a lifetime, but it's worth it. Okay, D Grant, jump in.
Well, dude, when you're on a roll, you don't have to stop and just kick it over.
My roll was
'Cause,
done. I kicked it over when my roll was done. I'm done rolling.
well, feel free to roll again, my friend.
Okay, fair enough. It's a game. We'll roll again.
So going back to what Kristen was saying about, some people not being ready. I think sometimes people aren't ready to hear your boundaries, and especially when we're coming from, I think all three of us can talk about the journeys of recovering from people pleasing. Obviously, Kristen can talk about it on an existential level because of the work that she does in her book and everything, which is fantastic. By the way, if you haven't read her book, whether you consider yourself a people pleaser or not, you probably know one. And having that kind of insight and perspective on these are the things that people that spent a lot of their time being highly sensitive and also highly caring and not necessarily knowing that, like, we have to put ourselves first, and that's not an evil thing. Because I think, a lot of us grow up in different parts of the country where, putting yourself first is considered like some sort of mortal sin. You're supposed to put God way up here, other people just below that, and then we're supposed to be down here, and everybody else, like, and I mean, even if you follow scripture says love your neighbor as yourself. But we're not taught how to love ourselves. And so that whole, your Wakanda example for the force field is just beautiful, Joe. But if you don't know how to love yourself, there is no force field, and everybody, whether you're friend or foe, you come in and have your way or whatever. And then I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody that struggled extensively with people pleasing and codependency, and have been in this process and in this journey of healing that and coming into a more whole place. And I wrote a book about healing from heartbreak. It's called Be Solid, How to Go Through Hell and Come Out Whole. But I'll be honest, I thought that wholeness was a destination. That, like, I was going to get to wholeness and then everything was going to be awesome. I could just, rock and roll, and never going to have another problem with confidence, never going to have another problem with a relationship, never going to have another issue with, like, communication or disagreement. And that's not true. So what you said about sustained steps, Joe, like, this is an ongoing process. And yes, patience is the first ingredient in love. Also, when you look at the other ingredients, kindness, gentleness, always hopeful, always perseverant, not easily angered. Guess what is required in each one of those things? Patience. So
100%.
And also something I'm coming into a greater awareness of, and I've rewritten the definition of what patience is. I used to think that patience was waiting calmly and not freaking out. And it's not that. Patience is about peacefulness, yes. It's about persistence. It's about preparation. It's about being still and being calm. But it's also about boundaries, because I don't know about you guys. I've got some people in my life that sometimes will say, "Hey, yeah, I'll be at your house at this time," and then like an hour and a half is past that time, and like, are you showing up? And they're like, "Oh yeah," and they've got all these reasons for why they're running late. And I got used to just accepting those reasons as the way that it was, without having a boundary and saying, like, my time is valuable too.
Right.
And having the personal power to be like, I give you this respect. Will you give me that respect back? And if you can't, then we need to have another sort of conversation, or we need to find a different sort of thing here. But like, I'm still growing in this. I'm still putting those roots down, and those roots are still getting deeper. But like, that makes me uncomfortable still to be able to say what it is that I want, because I'm so used to not getting that and having that voice, and feeling like like I was saying earlier, like feeling like when I say what I want, that it's going to be taken seriously. And this is a process that I am continually having to practice patience with myself in, and patience with God, because I'm like, hey God, why aren't you going to show up and do something about this?
Right. Yep.
Oh,
So
I
good.
can't wait to jump in.
Go, Kristen. Just go with it.
Oh my
Yeah,
God. Okay. So here's the thing. This is the one thing that I wanted to mention and that I didn't want to forget to mention is that when I wrote this down, when they don't listen to our words, they're going to have to listen to our actions, which means many times we'll approach people and we will verbalize the boundary. Please don't call me a name. Please stop being late. Please, blah, 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 whatever it might be. And then they do it again, and they do it again, and they do it again, and they do it again. And we verbalize and verbalize and verbalize. Now we're frustrated, we're angry, we're resentment, we're this, the other. Now there's all this disconnect happening. What I've learned through tried and true and testing, and this is hard for people who haven't practiced this yet, is that I say it once, maybe twice, and then there's an action that's going to follow that. And that action is, let's say someone's late. I'm like, I'll wait 15 minutes and then I'm gone. Whoever it is. See what I'm saying? That person values time with me. They won't do that again because she's going to leave. See what I'm saying? So I think it's important for people to understand that words alone don't always work. I have more stories than I could tell you about my words alone didn't mean anything to people. But it wasn't until I said, all right, words aren't working, action will. They're not listening to my words. They're going to have to hear my action. When I hang up the phone, don't return the call, walk out of the conversation, whatever the thing is that I needed to do. Here's the best part. Number one, boundaries say I'm valuable.
Yes.
So what many people don't understand is that boundaries are sexy AF. You start to set a boundary with someone, what you're saying is, I am MF valuable. And that person will get that message. So they will either step up and start going, whoa, this is the caveat. This is what people don't understand. They think the person's not going to like them. If this person values you at all, likes to be in your proximity, you're going to get even more attractive. And I'm not necessarily meaning looks, but it is so much more attractive than someone to set a boundary with us than someone to be our doormat. In fact, I will tell you something. If I smell doormattery, doormathood in somebody, I pull away from that friendship because I know that person does not have good self-worth. And somehow, some way, they're going to twist something I say. And then I'm going to get into an issue with them because they have low self-worth. But if I've got someone that straight up says, I got 10 minutes, Kristen, and they mean they have 10 minutes, I'm like, yeah, that person. Because I know that person has a good sense of self, so much so that they're willing to set that boundary and hold to that boundary. That means they know they matter. And there's an energy that is portrayed. So for anybody out there who might hear this now or on the replay or whatever, if you're thinking, I can't set this boundary because I'm not going to be attractive or this person is going to leave. I promise you, if this person at all values you in their life, you're going to get even more attractive from your boundary. If a person leaves, and I want this in all, 800 font, if this person leaves because you set a boundary, cut your losses and move on. You just cut the learning curve about learning who they are and how they really think of you. Because if they love you and want you in their life, they're going to show up to that boundary. If they don't, that means they are only interested in what they can take from you, and they will go find somebody else to take from.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Kristen. That's been my experience as well. And I want to highlight what you said because it hit me so deep, and that is that my boundaries or lack thereof is a direct reflection of my self-worth.
Yep.
And I didn't make that connection for the longest time. Started to choke up again here.
Yep.
And that by setting boundaries, wherever we set them, we are actually telling the other person how to treat me, right? And we're giving them permission. Oftentimes we blame the people who overstep their boundaries and mistreat us and whatever. But the truth is our responsibility, right? Responsibility, our ability to respond is really shows up when we set healthy boundaries because we are deciding for ourselves how much worth we have. Are we worth enough that we should not be mistreated, that we must not be mistreated? that's not saying to the other person that they're worthless, right? It has nothing, no reflection of them. It's a reflection of me. We talk about the inner world, outer world all the time. And this, again, goes back to that same idea that what I thought was the other person mistreating me because they're the bad guy, I gave them permission to do that because I didn't set the boundary, right? And my boundary was totally reflective of my worth. And man, it took my marriage almost failing to get to the point where I could even hear that, where I could see that all the stuff that was going on that was negative in my marriage when the relationship was crumbling, it wasn't her fault. It's because I gave her permission to treat me that way. And I thought that she was being the bad guy. And it was this wasn't conscious level on her part, but it's true of boundaries. If there's not a fence, people aren't going to stop. And sometimes you have to put a little electric shock going in that fence so that it repels the person enough to say, hey, that's a sore spot. That's not okay. You can't say those things, or you can't say them that way, not because I'm being a jerk, but because it hurts so badly. I can't be treated that way. I'm worth more than that. And as you said, Kristen, suddenly, rather than that making the person turn them off, it actually turns them on. Like, oh, look how valuable you are. Look how awesome you are, right? It's amazing. And I think it's our instinctual desire for comfort that makes us believe that somehow setting a boundary is going to put people off. It's going to isolate me, and we all want to be a part of something. These are all, evolutionary instincts that we have. But often, how often? So often, my instincts are so bad, right? My instincts just stink. They're not instincts at all. They're just stinky. And so it's so important for me with my spouse, with my boss, with my friends, with my kids to say, you don't treat me that way. You're the bad guy, but because I am worth it. Yes, Kristen, jump in.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm not sure what exactly you're talking about, but you're saying your instincts were bad when it comes to boundaries, but I want to clarify that and say it's a lack of connection to emotion that makes us not set healthy boundaries, because a lot of people, especially men, because men aren't, first of all, men don't stay in emotions long. That's just the way you're wired, because how could you go hunt or go to war? Something happens to your best friend right next to you and you have to continue on, right? Men don't stay in emotions very long. They're designed that way to protect the tribe, to kill animals, all the things back in the way back time. So that's number one. So they're not always super in touch with what's happening inside of themselves. They'll dip in, they'll feel the sting, and then it'll leave, and they're moved on to the next waffle box. Okay. I'm going back to work. I'm going back to the show. I'm going back to golf. Okay. So
Totally.
it's really, especially for men, I believe, and I know a lot about men, it really has to be with the man starting to really get in touch with, like you were when it was regarding your coworker. I did not like the way that felt. And slowing down enough, instead of skipping over it and going, yeah, brushing it under the rug, going to the next box, you're going, that didn't feel good to me. And then we evaluate that a minute. And then we say, okay, am I being too sensitive? Was it really true? And it's okay, you all, if you need to go and run something by somebody else.
Yes.
If you've got a friend or something, you're like, you know what? My boss, mom, sister, husband, brother, somebody said blank to me, or did blank to me, or did this, whatever. If you go to somebody that is pretty emotionally intelligent, they're going to tell you straight up, not cool, not okay. And you're going to get your answer. And it's okay if you don't know yet. It's okay if you can't hold that line for yourself yet. Now, I know I'm talking to the masses here. I'm not just like you two. I'm talking to, because this is what I teach. And there's so many different nuances here that I wanted to be sure to cover those for the people that might be listening to this, or that are like, wow, I'm not even near that stage yet. Please know that neither was I. Neither was I. Now I wrote the damn book on it, right? I wasn't my second book on it, because the other book has a boundary chapter. I didn't either, but as time went on and I paid attention, and each time that I felt myself reluctant to set a boundary, I paused and I said, what's stopping me? What am I afraid of? What am I afraid that's going to happen? And of course, we're afraid of not being liked, people leaving us, all these type of things. Then I thought, well, you've lived through that before. So what's the worst possible thing that can happen, Kristen, if you set a healthy boundary? Someone dies, someone loses a limb, the world blows up. This is how I would get to myself. Is any of those catastrophic things going to happen if you set this boundary? No. Then I would set the boundary. Because if someone leaves my life, that's a win-win. If someone heeds the boundary, that's a win-win. So it's another great healthy way to look at boundaries is that circling back to the beginning, they serve everyone. They even serve people watching you set the damn thing. Even people watching this, you're serving.
Yeah. Whew, I want to get to you, D. Grant, too, before we close this thing down. But one of the things that just jumped out at me and just escaped my mind. What was I going to say? I don't even know. Okay, I'm going to go to D. Grant because I can't remember. Okay, it'll come to me.
Well, Kristen could have kept going for a long time talking about that because that's, what you said about men having a hard time with emotions and it being hard into our system.
Perfect. Keep going.
Well, I think, and here's another part of it, and I don't know, Joe, if you can relate to this. So this is I've been doing a lot of inner child healing, to be honest with you guys, especially this week, just becoming into greater awareness of like core wound stuff. And I thought that I'd identified that about 6 years ago, and it turns out that I had identified a pretty low layer of the soil. There's always roots beneath the roots.
That's
so
right.
100%. Yes.
Yep.
Layers.
That's life.
Yeah.
That is life.
Freaking
I've
layers.
been getting down really into like the core root stuff. And one of the things that I recognize is for myself, like I'm a very highly sensitive person and I can get really highly sensitive about other people. But for myself, that sensitivity is not as strong as it used to be.
Yes.
And I recognize that part of that is because, going back to what I was saying earlier, like as a little kid, I was told that my voice didn't matter in a couple different specific events. But another thing that was very big was like growing up in the South, men are supposed to be strong. I'll put that in finger quotes because the strong that we're supposed to be is we're supposed to be emotionless.
It's everywhere, by the way. It's not just the South.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But like, I recognize that when I was a little kid, like 3-4 years old, and I would cry because I felt scared, or I would cry because, somebody had hurt my feelings, or I didn't feel like I was being respected or whatever. I was told to dry it up, like with a stern voice. And
100%.
So what that did to me was it blocked me from crying and expressing myself. But what it also did was, if you express emotions, you got to stop it. And so like, if I see something that's really emotional, like in a movie or something like that, like I get choked up, like, or if I see somebody really expressing passion, I can get really passionate and kind of start tearing up, and that's starting to return. And I feel like that's a great thing. But I also recognize that like in recent experiences, there have been some very hurtful things that have been said to me that like, I feel it in here somewhere, but I haven't really felt it as much because it's like I've tried to protect myself or tried to dismiss it because I'm not supposed to feel anything. And I think that that's something that guys can really struggle with. Even I'm a highly sensitive person that struggles with feeling things, and like that's a debilitating, like paralyzing sort of thing. And so having the awareness of this and having the patience and the self-love to just like sit with myself and not let myself get distracted or try to go off and find some sort of other thing to like, self-soothe or whatever, but like really just sit with. I spent some time with Angelina Frost this afternoon, and she worked with me through some of this stuff, and she's fantastic at these things. But like really just sitting with my body and feeling it in my body and not like dismissing it, because all of this stuff, all these emotions that we have locked ourselves from feeling, whether we're guys or girls, doesn't matter. these emotions we've blocked ourselves from feeling, they want to be felt so they can be released. And
Yes.
part of the boundary that we can give for ourselves is even placing a boundary on ourselves so that, like, okay, I'm not going to let myself run away from this situation because I'm going to choose to, I love myself. I choose to sit with myself in this and go through this process so I can fully heal and not just dismiss it.
Yeah. D. Grant, that's so good. And yes, I can relate to that on every level. So the picture that came to my mind, we talked about this force field from Wakanda, right? And what happens, I just picture this in my mind, is that we take that force field and we put it around our heart, our emotions. And we think that our emotions are the enemy, right? We're not going to let them in or out for that matter. And actually, as I was saying this out loud, it's actually the force field in reverse. We put the force field around our heart so that the emotions stay in. We don't want them to come out because somehow they're the enemy. That's what I'm taught to believe. And for me, it was during these 3 years when my mom was married to my stepdad. I was 11, 12, and 13. He was a domineering, narcissistic, I don't know if he's a narcissist, true one, but narcissistic, selfish, overbearing, just selfish guy. And in those 3 years, he intimidated me. And I'm like you, I'm a very sensitive person. So I would break down into tears because I was intimidated. I was afraid. At some point, and this wasn't even a conscious decision, at some point the tears dried up. And it was part of me inside going, I am not going to let this guy do this to me anymore. And I'm not going to show him that he's getting to me. So I took the force field and I put it around my emotions. I'm not going to let those out because certainly they're the bad guy. They're betraying me. That's what I understand as I look back on it now. And from the time I was 13 until I was 40, when I had my first child, I I think I cried maybe once, maybe on my wedding day. And it wasn't because I would well up with tears and I just say I'm going to keep it in because men don't cry. I didn't even feel it anymore.
Exactly.
I didn't even have the desire to cry. I had put the force field so tightly around my emotions that it was keeping it out because I thought that was the enemy, right? Which is totally false. That's a belief system that's skewed. It's actually keeping me from expressing and feeling my humanity. And of course, that starts to betray my intimate relationships because my wife's like, why don't you ever express emotion? Why doesn't this bother you? And I'm like, well, because I guess I'm wired differently than you. Well, yes, I'm wired differently because I rewired my heart to not feel it. In fact, I see this sine wave, that goes up and down. Let's say that here's ground zero on a sine wave. So there's a peaks and valleys, and they go up and below the line. Well, I decided I'm not going below the line anymore. Happy,
Yeah.
yes. Joy, sure. Love, all the good stuff, what I call it the good stuff, right? But I wasn't going to go below the line because that's anger, resentment, that's fear, that's being intimidated and humiliated. So I was only expressing and feeling half of my humanity. I wasn't feeling it. I didn't even know it was there. I just ignored it, and I actually thought that was a good thing for a lot of my life. Look at me. Look how proud I am that nothing bothers me. Nothing ruffles me. I'm a ice bucket, baby. I'm cold as ice, right? I'm warm on the outside, friendly to people. Everybody liked me, but never let my quote unquote negative emotions show through. And I've realized that I've mislabeled negative emotions. Yes, it's negative in terms of polarity, but it's not negative in terms of humanity. That's a big difference. Negative emotions, maybe they're negative on the scale of polarity. They're not negative in terms of my humanity. In fact, what's negative is when I shut them off, when I don't express them, because eventually, like a volcano, it's going to build up inside. And when it comes out, occasionally, it's going to spew all sorts of nasty, hot stuff that's going to, scorch the earth around me. And then I'm like, oh, I have to play cleanup after that. Right? That's no way to live. That's the way I lived for a lot of my life. 40, well, 30 something years of my life.
Yeah.
That's not humanity, right? That's
Joseph,
being a man, but it's not even humanity. Kristen, jump in there. Go ahead.
it's very typical. It's so typical. It is a plague. Our men are in crisis because of this. Men in general, that's why men's suicide rate is 75%, women's 25. I could go on and on. And this is something that is really important and that you guys have probably heard me talk about on the Wisdom app in that first year repeatedly, where men would come into the room and they'd be like, oh my God, they couldn't believe that I was talking about this stuff, especially coming from a woman. But I would tell you just something a little really super interesting, super short, is that I was raised in a male dominant household.
Great.
Right? 4 brothers. And when I cried, it was the boys would get in trouble. So if I started to tear up, there was like, oh my God, Kristen's crying. I learned, guys, my body learned defense mechanism not to cry. And I'm a female. Okay. So I had that stepping away from my divine feminine. Right. So I had to myself relearn, because to this day, I will cry at a show. I will cry at a song. You're tearing up on here. I'm tearing up on here. But when I'm hurt, I don't cry.
Right.
I get mad.
Me
Because
too.
that's acceptable male emotion, which
Right.
is what I was taught. So this is all undoable, you guys. This is the point that we need to understand, is that this is all healable, changeable, fixable. A defense mechanism went into place, and we can undo that by becoming more conscious about things. But I'm going to leave it at that, because I know we're at an hour.
Yeah, we're out of time, and we could go on, and we probably will touch on this subject quite often. But here's what I want to do in the last few minutes. This will not be exhaustive. We won't even explain everything that we're saying here. But so I want to put D. Grant and Kristen Brown. I want you to put yourself in the seat of someone who's listening in, and they're agreeing. They're going, "Yes, that's me. I get it. I understand." We've talked quite a bit of mindset and motivation. We've covered those really well. We haven't covered methods, which I'm totally cool with, because as I said from the very beginning of this broadcast, if you start with methods, they're not going to be sustainable if your mindset and your motivation are skewed. So we've covered both those really two important things. But if you just give one or two practical, small, simple steps that are sustainable for someone who says, what's my first step in this journey towards setting healthy boundaries, which are healthy for me and for others? What practical step can either one or two can you give so that people have something to go to do next, an action step?
Who would you like?
Let's start with D. Grant. D. Grant, what's an action step or two that someone can take that would help them on this journey towards healthy boundaries?
I think awareness is like 90% of the work. And part of the thing that keeps us from drawing any boundaries at all is that just we can't see what we don't see. And so looking at yourself and asking yourself, how does this feel? Because even if you can't necessarily feel the emotion about it, like directly, you know when you're not feeling good. And when something's not feeling good, then that's an opportunity to like evaluate yourself and check in with yourself and go, okay, what is it that I'm actually feeling and why? And I think why is probably the most, I'm learning that why is maybe one of the most important questions we can ever ask ourselves about anything. Because why always has whatever answer comes, you can always ask why again and dig even deeper. If you ask how and then you get a process, you don't necessarily say how again or what or where or whatever. But like why is always digging deeper into the soil and uncovering more of the thing. And so like asking yourself questions and just becoming more aware is what I would say.
Love that.
I
So I
second
firmly
that.
believe, yeah, 100%. And I understand more and more every day that questions really are the answer. We are always searching for answers, but answers are definitions. Definitions have limits. We are unlimited, dynamic people with limitless possibilities. So an answer might be helpful in a moment, but it's certainly not helpful for a lifetime, because we're not the same person tomorrow as we are right now. So that's great. I love the question thing, man. That's really so good. Kristen, I know you could fill up another hour with this question. But just
I could talk for 48 hours. Okay. So
give
real quick,
a small, simple step that they can take in the
very simple. The first thing is that to recognize when you've done wrong, when you've been done wrong, because people, they tend to skip. It's such a habit to ignore it. You're not honoring your true self. So just like you had to go inside, Joseph, and honor how you were feeling, that's the same. We need to go inside and say, we know when we've been, infracted upon, we can feel it. Okay. Then ask ourselves was that disrespect? Just try to name it. Was it disrespectful? Was it abusive? All we're doing is identifying at this point. Identifying is a massive first step, because you may not have been doing that before, just ignoring it. Then the second thing to remember is that people are only repeatedly doing these things to you because you're allowing them to. Okay. So it is our job to protect and respect ourselves and to set up these healthy limits so that they don't do that. The very quick third thing that I want want to say is that you may lose a person or two if you set a boundary, but your energetic increase is going to be so amazing that who you attract to you from that energetic increase is going to be way more better treatment than the person that you lost. That person is going to willingly show up to this new level of value.
Amen.
Yeah, boy, that
sister.
takes me right to that. Amen, 100%. That takes me to a phrase I've heard that I never used in this context, but it really fits and says, those that matter won't care that you're setting boundaries, right? Those that matter won't, but those that care don't matter. Now that sounds callous, but this is the people who don't care about you. So hear this really carefully. When you're setting healthy boundaries, those who matter and who you matter to won't care. In fact, they'll actually like this. But those who don't care, no, I said this all wrong. I started out really well here. Now I've lost it. Those who care won't mind. That's what I should have said. Those who care won't mind. And those who mind don't care. So that's important to keep in mind. So I did want to add, I saw Kelly in the audience here, and she's talking about that she takes a pause. She's learning to pause, she says, before I get overwhelmed or upset. And I can't tell you, Kelly, how important that is. And not coincidentally, I think very divinely synchronized, I created a blog post around the word pause. In fact, it was one of the first blog posts of my blog on mojo.substack.com. It's a 5-letter acronym, which is my all-time favorite things in the world, PAUSE, which stands for, in my blog post, prayerful attention. Let me see if I can hold this second here. Pause. Prayerful attention unleashes supernatural energy. PAUSE. Prayerful attention unleashes supernatural energy. And why I like this so much is because it builds on what D. Grant said about awareness. Awareness and attention are very closely tied. Attention actually is very mindful awareness, right? Prayer, so you can substitute that with meditation. But we have all experienced, all three of us have experienced how that the meditation takes it from the external world to the internal world. Again, part of that serenity prayer, the things that I can control are all inside of me. The things I can't control are outside of me. So prayerful attention unleashes, right? This is a release. And oftentimes boundaries are holding something in, as we talked about. The boundaries turned upside down and backwards. It's holding things inside of me that need to be released. And there is supernatural energy within us all. So this is for all of us, supernatural energy. Now, energy is really important here because every guru, I see that hand, every guru that I've ever listened to, I see both of those hands, every guru that I've ever listened to talks about no change, no transformation will ever happen without energy, and they tie it to emotion. So emotion, energy and motion, if you don't do that, oh, we're running out of time. Okay, if you don't have energy, then you will not sustain it. So which hand first? I'm going to go D. Grant's because I saw the motion.
Well, we both have to jump off. My battery's about to die. He's got to go.
Right, I got a bed appointment.
All right, very good. All right, so like I said, we could go on forever. We just touched the surface. Thank you so much to all of you who have tuned in, who have spent some time with us. Thank you so much to D. Grant, to Kristen Brown for your hour of time, energy, attention, love, expertise, and brilliance. Kristen, where would people find you offline after we sign off?
YouTube's the best place. I spend a lot of time over there at Kristen Brown, or my website, kristenbrown.org. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Kelly and Kevin, who popped in and said hello. I don't know who anybody else was. People listen and don't pop in, but thank you for everybody who's listening now or on the replay.
D. Grant, how do people connect with you offline or off of this platform anyway?
I'm at D. Grant Smith at Instagram and YouTube, and go grab some awesome stories at growthfarming.com.
Sweet. And I'm at MoJoe.studio, which is right there below my face. On behalf of Kristen Brown, D. Grant Smith, and all of you who have tuned in and shared this time with us, thank you so much. God bless you all.
Bye, Kelly. See you guys.